You're listening to Best Forevers, a podcast for kindred spirits, a podcast that encourages you to love more in your friends and to further consider the issues that plague friendships. I'm Alysa Lucas, and as you know, I spend a lot of time talking about celebrating friendships and about working through issues that friends experience. So I think it's time to finally get to the core of both of these experiences, and that is trust. When we have long-lasting, loving friendships, it may be because we trust those folks more than anyone else. And when things go wrong, it's perhaps that the trust had been challenged. In the upcoming weeks and months, I'll be covering topics like friendship breakups, secret keeping, hurt, manipulation, loneliness, and roommate conflict. And trust is a precursor to all of these topics. Now, don't worry, we'll also be covering a number of celebratory topics as well. But as I like to say in my dark side class, with the dark, we find the light, friends. Therefore, in this episode, I'll be talking about the definition of trust and how that operates in friendships, with a list of 4 shoulds to do in friendship as it relates to trust. So let's go ahead and get started. Trust feels like a phenomenon we know when it's there, and we also know when it's been violated, but it's harder to put into words. But don't you worry, don't you fret. I've got academic sources, quotes from the internet, examples to help us break it down, all sorts of good stuff. So I, of course, start with one of my most trusted sources, Urban Dictionary. No, but for real. The top definition for trust on urbandictionary.com is, quote, trust is what you expect from people close to you, end quote. I think this definition helps us to determine if people follow through on the things that we hope that they do or say in our relationships. So, for example, if I expect my friends to keep my secrets, I tell them a secret, and then when they don't tell anyone, they're showing they're doing what I expect. On the other hand, if no more than 10 minutes after I tell a friend something sensitive, they're blabbing it to a coworker, a friend, the lady standing behind them in the line at the grocery store, all of Twitter, they have violated my expectations, and I know I can't trust them. A more academic definition, though, comes from Rempel and his colleagues from 1985. Quote, trust in a close relationship refers to the confidence an individual has in a partner's willingness to be responsive to the person's needs, even when they conflict with the partner's own preferences, end quote. Now, I think it's important to understand that trust is often understood primarily in romantic relationships when it comes to interpersonal communication. But I think the same ideas can be applied to friendship until we have that chance to test it with academic research, right? And so this reminded me, though, of an article from Psychology Today, which referred to trust coming down to confidence, right? So Rempel and his colleagues talk about it. Psychology Today talks about it. Feelings of confidence and security. So now feelings may be just that. A feeling, you just know, it's like intuition, you just know. Or maybe it's a perception. Maybe that's how you perceive that person to be. You perceive to be confident and secure around them, right? So we may learn later that we were wrong, but it seems like trust is something that has to be built over time and is also about being in that specific moment. I feel secure telling you this fear of mine right now. Right now in this moment, I feel secure doing that. And you've made me feel confident about doing so in the past. The future is wide open, but right now, how do I feel? So we have to think about that we're relying on past experiences, present moments, and those things might change, but it comes down to what we perceive or feel at that time. Now, as you probably know, I majored in interpersonal communication at Michigan State University, and that's when I first learned about trust. My classes talked about the following topics, which I have then continued to discuss in all of my interpersonal classes that I teach now as a communication professor. And I will say that this information comes from my personal notes until I can find the source, and then I'll update my show notes with the appropriate sources. First, a state of trust is when one person believes without absolute proof that the other's behavior is not going to lead to negative consequences for them. So we do put a lot of weight on trusting someone when we don't have the proof that we can trust them. Oh, okay, we got some past experiences. But I think this is similar to the Urban Dictionary definition, that we have an inherent need to know if our friends will reliably meet our expectations. And obviously, vice versa, right? Can we reliably meet their expectations? Second, we can discuss trusting actions and trusting motives. Actions refer to trusting what the other person is going to do, whereas motives are about trusting reasons behind someone's actions. Rempel and his colleagues from 1989 get at these motives as well. Quote, trust can act as a filter through which people interpret their partner's motives. Thus, the why is critical to trust in relationships. Why are people doing the things that they did? Can you trust why they might have told your secret? Like, what was the reason behind it? Can you still maintain your trust with that person, even though they might have betrayed your confidence or shared the information with someone else? Finally, we discussed the work of W.B. Pearse from 1974, who outlined 3 necessary criteria for trust to exist. Now, if any of the 3 criteria are lacking, then there is no trust. So here's what the criteria include. Well, first of all, there must be risk. If you aren't risking anything, then you aren't trusting. Okay. The second criteria is there must be predictability. You should have some basis to predicting that the trust would not be violated, and that's going to be past experiences. And so one of the things is that's why it takes time to do it, right? You need time to experience that trust, because their previous behaviors and actions and the things that they've done and said are going to be what leads you down to predicting that the trust won't be violated in the moment or in the future. The third criteria is there must be options. Trust is something we do with our free will, so there has to be choice involved, that we choose to trust this person. We decide that we are going to share this information. So what I love about my notes from undergrad is that I use the movie Point Break, starring Keanu Reeves and Patrick Swayze, as an example. So one of the things I would do is I would write down like, oh, this reminds me of this relationship that I had, or this reminds me of this movie or TV show, or whatever the case is. So if you look at my notes, you can see all these funny things that I've connected interpersonal communication with. And Point Break, the original, is a pretty darn good movie. So Keanu Reeves, I'm just going to use the actors' names because Keanu Reeves and Patrick Swayze are above any character names, I believe. So Keanu plays an FBI agent that goes undercover to bring a gang of surfing bank robbers down, right? They only do it during summer, and summer's coming to a close, so you best get on it. And it turns out that Patrick, oh no, is the leader of that group. So he's the main robber. And I don't feel like I'm spoiling, because this came out in the 80s/90s, and then there was a remake with one of the Hemsworth brothers. So I think we kind of know this by now, right? So Keanu infiltrates this group and essentially becomes friends with all of them, and specifically Patrick, while also having to consider that they're breaking the law, and it's actually his job to bring them to justice. Well, he's got a lot of cognitive dissonance, like, I like them, but they're also bank robbers, so let's get some evidence and bring them down. So in one particular scene, Keanu joins the crew for skydiving, and he has to risk taking his parachute from a robber. He has to trust Patrick Swayze in this moment, and so far, Patrick has been predictable and reliable. This may change, wink, wink, that might tell you what happens in the end. However, until now, he's shown to have Keanu's back. And let's be real, it was Keanu's choice to be there ultimately, as he became more friendly with them all. But this is the one criterion that I think is questionable, because it was his job. But ultimately, our jobs are our choices as well. So you can see that they have the 3 criteria for trust to exist between Keanu Reeves, at least his perception or feeling of Patrick Swayze, right? He has to take the risk, so he has to take a parachute from someone that is a robber. So is the parachute going to open? Well, let's find out. And then, any of the evidence that he's received beforehand, it's probably why he likes Patrick Swayze. Like, he's starting to see, like, this guy might have his back. He helps him get out of a altercation with another gang of surfers, which apparently is a huge problem in this movie. And then all of it comes down to the choice. So I think that in this scenario, what makes the movie fascinating or compelling besides the action-packed nature of it and the fact that it's Keanu Reeves and Patrick Swayze and also a little Gary Busey on the side is that there's trust. All of these criterion are met, and so he trusts this person, and that's what makes it more interesting because he is balancing this idea of trusting someone when most likely we probably shouldn't trust criminals. So I think this, between the definitions, this gives us a good idea of what trust is, as well as this example from Point Break. But let's continue to explore how it operates in friendship with the 4 shoulds of trust and friendship. So I took all of my research that I did to put together this episode on trust, and then thinking about all the things that I've learned and I know and I've researched on friendship, and I created this list. So we'll call this a first draft, okay? And so I'm really interested in what you think of it. And so here are the 4 shoulds of trust and friendship. The first one is we should share, disclose, and even maybe let people in on our secrets. So here's a quote from the internet, quote, "A true friend is someone you can trust with all your secrets," end quote. Now, I know you're probably thinking there are some people that I would not trust with my information, and we're great friends. But trust doesn't always have to be about information. It can be trusting people. Like, think about it this way. Who do I trust to come take care of my sweet baby angels, Rooney, Ferguson, and Finnegan, right? Like, that's a different type of trust, right? Who would you leave your kids with? Who would you ask for assistance, like maybe picking you up from if you had to take your car into the repair shop? Like, there can be other types of trust, but I think that secret keeping is a marker of friendship. So considering Pearse's 3 criteria, first we need the risk. And sharing information about ourselves, which goes along with this idea of we should share, disclose, and even maybe let people in on our secrets, is that we have to take that risk. Because if once we share our secrets, we don't know what the person will do with that information, and that is the risk. Self-disclosure is a risk. Self-disclosure about things that are very personal, sensitive, and make us vulnerable is risky. In my Dark Side of Communication class, we read a chapter called "We Always Hurt the Ones We Love" by Roland Miller. One of the first explanations for why we can hurt these folks is what he calls access to weaponry. So information is power, and it can be used against us. We can push our loved ones' buttons better than anyone else because we know them better than anyone else because they have given us information, right? They have willingly given us information about themselves, and then if we're angry or hurt, sometimes we push those buttons, right? So we have that arsenal to use against them, but it's our decision not to do that, right? We can choose to be like, even though I know this information, I'm not going to use it against them. If we never share anything with friends, though, we're not taking any risk, and therefore we may never have close friends because a lot of ways in which we develop closeness is through sharing parts of ourselves. And I think we can share that through information, and I think that we can also share our pieces of our life by letting people into other things. Like if you're a musician, for example, and you don't necessarily talk about it, but you invite people to an open mic or, a session where you're playing music, and then people get to know you a little bit better by observing that, right? So I think there's lots of ways that we can let people in, but if we don't take that risk, then we're not going to have those relationships. To meet the predictability criterion, we have to give our friends a chance to show that they will and do keep our secrets, but we'll never know if we don't share in the first place, which obviously goes back to risk. Now, predictability isn't about intentionally setting up folks with a test to see if they pass it, but rather it's sharing information naturally and organically in a conversation as you're developing relationships. And if we are secure in that moment, and over time knowing that person is reliable and trustworthy or not. So we have to take the risk in that moment to be able to see later if they will become predictable. And again, let's be clear, we decide what we share with who and when we share it. I asked my students in my communication theory class, what indicators would lead you to share information with someone else? And here's some of the responses that I've received over the years. one of the things that would indicate that they would share information and take the risk and make that choice, right? So we're going back to the third criterion, right? That there's some level of option and free will, and we make the choice. That they make the choice first when the other person might share information first. So that other person has shown some level of wanting to create a relationship or start to develop trust, right? Sometimes we just know, and they say, I will share information if I'm vibing with that person. And so it's when you're interacting with someone and you click right away, right? And it's this great back and forth, and you just feel like you've known the person a lot longer. Sometimes that can happen right away. And so that might be a sign to share information with them. The next one that I've heard over the years is that they observed the person with less risky information. So they might have shared something and seen what they did with it. Was it protected? How did they use it? Did they bring it up again? Different things like that. And so then that would indicate that if they protect maybe less risky information, that they might protect more risky information. Another reason why people would share, according to my students, is that they felt the person was similar to them and would understand what they're going through. So I had a student say that I'm more likely to talk about some of my personal issues with women because I'm a woman, or I'm more likely to share with this person because they had this experience and I met them somewhere where we're both having this experience, and so I'm going to share it with them. So there's so many reasons, but those are some of the most common that my students have talked about over the years. And I think those are all sort of things that we might do in our head to sort of determine if we can benefit from sharing the information or if it's too risky to do so. But in the end, it is still a choice. So we can use this criterion a lot to determine when we'll share the information. But the idea for this first should is that we should do it, right? So we might get a lot of green lights from people we're developing friendships with, but it certainly depends on us if we'll actually put our foot on the gas, so to speak. So that's what it comes down to. We should share, but maybe it's when we determine it's the right person or the right moment or whatever the case might be. The second should is we should be prepared for some betrayal. Quote, betray a friend and you'll often realize you have ruined yourself. End quote. Betrayal is inevitable, unfortunately, which may be why some refuse to be vulnerable to put themselves out there or to share. But again, that's the risk. So when does betrayal happen? So I go back to the idea of students vibing with someone else, and it makes me think about how we meet people and we click right away, which I already mentioned. They can make us feel really comfortable to share information. But again, the past and present may provide us with good feelings, but we may learn from them that we were wrong in that feeling. So although we're vibing, it's still a risk, and that can lead to betrayal. So we have to consider that some people might be really good in those first interactions, or that we can vibe with people, but then once we get to know each other, that vibe was just maybe something special in that moment, and that the future will show that we may be betrayed by this person. Another way in which betrayal can happen is mistakes happen. If there are unclear boundaries surrounding information, someone may accidentally tell someone their friend's secret, but with no malicious intent. Now, that doesn't mean it doesn't hurt that they might have shared the information, but sometimes we have to make more formal and official, we have to have, everyone sign a contract. No, we might just need to be more formal, official, and direct about what information we are sharing with our friends and what we expect them to do or not to do with the role of protecting that private information. So in some cases, maybe we learn friends may be more likely to make mistakes, and then we adjust the type of information we share with them. But we all make mistakes, right? It might be something like, oh, I didn't realize that was something you didn't want other people to know. And I think that's sort of the bumps along the road of friendship. And again, it could be something like, okay, there was a bump with trust, right? This might predictability might take a hit, but it might be something that can be repaired easily, right? So in a January 2018 Psychology Today article by F. Diane Barth entitled Betrayed by Your Best Friend, 6 Ways to Heal Your Heart. I like that the author discusses that betrayal is not actually betrayal, okay? She says, quote, change and loss can feel like betrayal, but it's not always meant that way, end quote. And I think mistakes can fall here too. But as they talk about change and loss, one of the things that the article talks about is that these changes in relationships can feel very personal. So if a friend becomes busier and doesn't have time for you, it could feel like a betrayal, although it's not meant that way, right? Or maybe they started a new relationship and so they are managing the time they spend with you and with their partner, and it can feel like a loss, although it's not meant to be that way, right? Like that's not what they intend. So I think intent goes back to it, like mistakes happen. There is not malicious intent there. And then we just have this idea of there are things that are going to happen, and it's life, it's people, it's relationships, it's dealing with all this. And it's quite different than being in a friendship and being in a marriage and finding out that one's best friend and one's husband are having an affair. That might be different than my friend moved to a different city and we don't talk as much and feeling betrayed. That doesn't mean it doesn't hurt or doesn't feel like a loss. The difference is one is intentional, and the severity level, I think most people would agree, is higher when someone is going to find out that their trust with their best friend and their partner, probably the two most important people in their life, has just been decimated, right? So one is intentional and the other is not. So it might be more about figuring out how to navigate natural ebbs and flow of a friendship to manage sort of these like little bumps of betrayal, right? The ones without intent, because here's the thing, the intentional ones, that's where we might need to pay more attention. So ask yourself, is the betrayal purposeful, or can we have a chat? Like clearing up boundary confusion or adding a coffee get-together on the calendar so that we can figure out the bumps, or just being like, oh, we don't have time for each other, let's add in a coffee date. Now we have time for each other. Problem solved, right? We hope, though, that the betrayals we may experience will all be unintentional, right? Again, I'm not saying that those aren't hurtful. I'm saying those are inevitable. Those are things that are going to happen. There's more choice and purpose and intent in some other betrayals, and we might need to keep more of an eye on that, right? So we may hope that the betrayals we experience will be unintentional, mistaken, or not specifically personal, but unfortunately we'll have toxic folks in our lives who will transgress against us. So the third should is we should consider what to do if we no longer trust our friend. Quote, when you completely trust a person without any doubt, you'll automatically receive one of two things, a friend for life or a lesson for life. I once had a student come to me and share a difficulty they were having with a friend. Their friend had promised them a ride home for Thanksgiving, which was, home for them was a good 3 hours away from the university. And then the friend decided to stay on campus for Thanksgiving and didn't tell my student, who was left without a ride and without the chance to go home for the break. My student was upset, angry, and betrayed. She asked how she should proceed with the friendship, and my first question was, do you want to maintain this friendship? And she wasn't sure. I asked her what she learned from the episode, and she said that she learned that her friend is flaky, and this was a larger episode of something that she had seen previously. And I said to her, that seems like good information to have about your friend. You can decide to continue the friendship, or maybe you can use the information to better the communication with your friend. So I think one of the things, when I was younger, and I know I've talked about this before, is this idea of believing that friendships have to be everything, and they're everything to us, and we have to include them in everything, and they're in every aspect of life, and just we're all encompassing each other's life. And that's not the case, right? So we learn information from people when they make these mistakes, or they betray us, or they transgress against us. We learn a lot of information. We learn information about them. We learn information about what we're willing to tolerate. We learn information about how we might be able to use that to be better communicators. And we use that information to determine whether or not we want to be in that friendship anymore. So one of the things is her friend is flaky, but that doesn't mean she's a bad friend otherwise. So one of the things is going back to the definition of trust. She is not secure or confident with the reliability of her friend when it comes to, maybe making time to spend together, or making time to meet up, or making arrangements for rides or anything like that. But maybe in other ways, the friend is someone who's really good in her life. And so she wanted to correct it and just move on, which she can totally do. But I also think that we should not ignore the information we get from people. That we get information and they're telling us who they are. And we should not ignore them or correct them in that sense, right? And so it's very well that she could say, okay, I'm not going to ask this person for rides anymore. So she changed what she expected of her friend, and then that friend won't be able to betray her with, not being able to go home for Thanksgiving, which she was really looking forward to. I think we're often worried about ending friendships or our friendships changing, but we do have to remember that, A, as I like to say in my classes and on the podcast and life and on Twitter, we all deserve to be happy, healthy, and safe. And B, that friendships are voluntary. We do not have to be friends with people who hurt us, neglect us, cheat us, or betray us. It may not be a decision that is made lightly, but after thoughtful reflection, it may be time to cut out the toxic, untrusting person from your life. So again, it might be determining the severity of the betrayal. Is it something like we were talking about in the previous should, where it's a mistake or unintentional, or is it something more intentional? Is it being flaky on a ride, or is it completely betraying a confidence that impacts your health, life, work, and so forth, right? So I like the work of Mellinger from 1956. Yes, that's correct. It's old, but I think he makes some excellent points that we can use here today. So he talks about trust from the angle of being distrustful. Quote, by distrust is meant the feeling that another's intentions and motives are not always what he says they are, and that he is insincere or has ulterior motives, end quote. And that specifically a person distrusted is potentially threatening. So do we want to wait to see what those threats or those consequences of the threats will be? Mellinger talks about our communication becoming more about decreasing any anxiety of their distrust that's causing us, instead of actually communicating in a way that's effective or accurate with them. So we are more interested oftentimes when we distrust someone that we are communicating in a way to decrease anxiety. And that seems anxiety inducing. If you are constantly in distrust with someone and feeling like you're never safe from threats of betrayal, then that might be a time to say, this is time to end the friendship. So a quote I found on Pinterest, quote, if I cut you off, chances are you handed me the scissors, end quote. The scissors being the betrayal, I think. The last should is we should accept the friendship breakup or be prepared for relationship repair. Quote, it's not easy to detach from people you've had close ties with. Sometimes it's necessary in order to restore your sanity, your mind peace, which is also from Pinterest. Quote, apology accepted, trust denied. That's from geckoandfly.com. And, quote, you don't lose friends because real friends can never be lost. You lose people masquerading as friends, and you're better for it, end quote. Mandy Hale. Trust develops over time, but it can evaporate in a second. And sometimes we can come back from betrayal with discussion, concessions, apologies, maybe even forgiveness and new boundaries. And sometimes we cannot. Rempel and his colleagues from 2001 talk about high trust, medium trust, and low trust in relationships. I think this is important to going back and going, it might be time to end the friendship, and then it might be time to break up or to repair. Quote, high trust individuals feel secure and confident that their partner can be counted on to care for them and be responsive to their needs, end quote. So as we talked about with the definition, when people feel secure, it's less likely these folks did not experience a betrayal. And I would say yet, because, those little baby ebbs and flows, those little baby mistakes, those are likely to come. But high trust individuals might be able to work through those a little bit more quickly. Quote, we believe that medium trust individuals ultimately want to dispel their doubts and establish a sense of certainty, end quote. So it seems like these individuals may have feelings of vulnerability and need reassurance about the relationships, need reassurance about trust. And this could also mean a repair is possible. So let's fix this ebb, this flow, this mistake, this unintentional betrayal. But, quote, individuals in low trust relationships are people who have little confidence that their partner is truly concerned about them and their relationship, end quote, which may mean there is need for it to end. So think about when you're in friendships, do you have high trust, medium trust, or low trust? High trust, it's like you're just keep it on, you just keep it going, everything's good, continue to maintain, continue to be reliable on the expectations, you're doing great. You're doing amazing, sweetie. Isn't that what they say? Medium trust folks might have some experiences where the betrayals may be seen as personal, but then it might come down to a decision on whether or not it's intentional or not. But if you're in low trust, this might be where it's like, okay, I'm going to accept that a breakup is needed here. And this is where we'll go in the future. What limitations or restrictions are reasonable to place on a friendship? How do we do a friendship breakup? Is there a script? Are there any tips or the best practices? And how can I help myself grieve the loss of a friend? So stay tuned as we navigate these issues, and we can jump in with this knowledge of trust to help us determine if a breakup is needed and how to go about doing it. So what do you think? How would you describe trust? Because I'd love to hear your quotes, metaphors, and more. Do the 4 shoulds ring true to you? Is there anything you would add or delete? I would love for you to send me your suggestions. And what topics do you want to hear most as it relates to trust or betrayal? Please feel free to share any episode topics with me, and you can email me at bestforeverspod@gmail.com or find me online at bestforeverspod on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And be sure to join the closed Facebook group for more friendship, including memes, discussions, and so much more. So until next time, friends, think about what trust means to you in friendships, because without trust or our friends, who would we be? Listening to Best Forevers. If you like what you hear, be sure to subscribe, rate, review, and of course, share with a friend. Please be sure to follow Best Forevers on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Best Forevers Pod, and I'm at Dr. Alysa Lucas on Twitter. You can always find the podcast webpage for more information at bestforeverspod.com, and share your stories of friendship by emailing me at bestforeverspod@gmail.com. And if you'd like to support the movement to love on our friends more, check out the podcast on patreon.com/bestforeverspod. Now, friends, check out this recommended podcast that you must get in your ear holes immediately.
We interrupt your regularly scheduled podcast programming.
And we're not sorry.
I'm Harmony.
And I'm Maggie.
And we're Rebel Girls Book Club.
We're here to take an intersectional feminist approach to books from all over the spectrum.
Bestsellers? We've got you covered.
That one book from English class you hated while you read but you can't forget?
We've got that too. Comic books, nonfiction, it's all right here.
So grab your tea, grab your blanket, and cue up your favorite podcast app of choice. Let's get rebellious about your new favorite reads.